afternoon, Dick, and thank you for joining us for our monthly variety virtual bash pub night.
Great to be talking to you.
What's that, sorry?
It's great to be talking to you.
Good news. We host these monthly pub nights to catch up with our entrants in lieu of a real pub night, and it's a great way to sort of update everybody. And we've been doing them virtually for the last few months, and this time we're due to be leaving on the Wednesday the 12th. So next Wednesday, we're due to be leaving for the start of the bash from Melbourne to Great Keppel Island. So we thought it'd be a great chance to have you along for a chat to talk about the first event. So and I was all the way back in 1985, and obviously chat about the legacy and I guess how it all started for such a brazen idea, and we obviously have over 300 people who still enter the event year in, year out, and still raise over $2 million each year. So we'd love to chat to you a bit further, and I'll like to welcome you. Appreciate you taking the time to have a chat.
Thank you. Fire away with the questions.
Okay, so on the very first Variety Bash in 1985, you were joined by 50-odd cars on your journey from Bourke to Burketown. So Bourke's in New South Wales to Burketown in Queensland. Can you tell us a little bit more about the inspiration for the event?
Yeah, I'll tell you how I came up with the idea of the bash. Very simple. As a young kid, when I was about 6 or 7 years of age, I used to go and watch the famous Red X trials, the Red X trials of the 1950s. And they would drive through at night past Roseville Station on the Pacific Highway, just where I lived on Sydney's northern side. And I thought, gee, when I'm old enough to get a license, I'm going to go on a Red X trial. This was my idea. Well, by the time I got my license, some 10 years or so later, there weren't any Red X trials. And so I came up with the idea we'll have our own Red X trial. And I previously started the Qantas Antarctic flights, which I decided we'd raise money for charity. So we picked a charity. I think it was the St. Vincent de Paul for that. With the bash, I thought, well, I'll raise money, have a lot of fun going out back, but raise money as well. And in this particular case, I decided Variety should be the recipient. And I'm glad I did, because as you know, Variety's kept it going for so many years. But so basically it was to have my own Red X trial. I had a lot of wealthy friends, and I knew they'd all try and outdo each other with the most expensive four-wheel drive. So I said, car has to be 20 years old, and the lower the value, the more points you get. And then a lot of my friends, well, some of them anyway, they like to give, but they like to do it secretly, and because they think they might be called a do-gooder if they're donating. So I came up with the idea that you could bribe the judge, which was me, and you could bribe to be first for the day or what particular thing you wanted. And that allowed my wealthy friends to show off by donating to Variety, but to do it in an acceptable way. And I think it was a pretty cunning idea.
Well, really good idea. So from Bourke to Burketown, how did you come up with the route for the first Variety Bash?
Yes, well, it's funny, I can't remember. I think it was mainly places I wanted to go. By then I was into helicopters and mainly flying by helicopter, so I hadn't been out back on the ground. And the original plan was to go from Sydney Opera House to Bourke and then along to Tibooburra. But when we got to Bourke, an incredible rainstorm came, and so we had to reroute the bash, which went via Charleville. And so basically Bourke to Burketown, first of all, it rhymed, B to B, and I hadn't been to some of those places on the ground, and so that was the reason I picked the route.
Nice one. Very remote. As one who plans the trips, I couldn't imagine trying to do it in 1985 without the technology and the GPS and lots of stuff to be able to keep everybody on track. But
yeah, these were the days before GPS, of course, and just handwritten maps and dead reckoning, and that made it really exciting because you didn't really know where you were most of the time.
Mm-hmm. And then we obviously love a dirt track from Victoria. We hunt them out actively. How's the conditions for you on the first trip?
Well, mainly, I mean, from Bourke, it was supposed to be dirt to Tibooburra and then basically dirt right through to Boulia and Baduri. But because we had to reroute the track via Charleville, we were on bitumen for a while. Right. So we picked a special route, which was the old Ada Vale Road, which was really rough, almost four-wheel drive. And even though we weren't supposed to have anyone racing, we actually had it as a timed segment. And there's a famous film done by the BBC. Excuse me. there's a famous film by the BBC, just getting some noise here, I'm sorry. And anyway, the famous film by the BBC showed everyone rushing through the gate and going on this Ada Vale section. Incredible.
Nice one. I can only imagine. It's a pretty rough part of the world out that way.
Yep, definitely.
And what were the highlights of that trip? Were there any incidents of note?
Well, I think the biggest highlight was it was the first time it had been done. So we had lots of people. John Newcombe, the famous tennis player. We had John Singleton with his then wife, Belinda Green, who was Miss World. And it was a fantastic trip because I think I originally planned it for 24 cars, but in the end, people were rushing into my office and handing over cheques written out to Variety to bribe me. We ended up with about 54 vehicles. We only made about 220 grand. We thought that was enormous, but of course, compared to modern bashes, it's not a lot of money.
Well, $220,000 in 1985 is pretty much comparable, I'd say. It's pretty bad effort. And then the cars that are on board that time, we've got a wide range. I think the oldest one we've got is a Peugeot, give or take. You must have had quite an array of cars that made the trip.
Yes, in fact, we had mainly EH Holdens and that type of thing. I drove an EH Holden, and I managed to get Red-X to sponsor me. Isn't that amazing? It was in the dying days of the famous brand of Red-X. But the oldest car, I think, was a Model T Ford, and it used to do incredible times. We'd flag it off, and then it'd average about 100 miles per hour to get to the finishing point. But then we realised they were putting it in a trailer and driving like mad, hidden in the back of a trailer. And then I always remember Kevin Weldon, he was out to become the greatest cheat. And he had this little black Volkswagen that could do incredible times. And we found that they actually had two Volkswagens, and they'd send one off hours ahead. It had the same numbers, identical. They sent it off hours ahead, and then we'd flag the second one off thinking it was the first one, or there was only one. And it got these incredible times until we realized he was cheating. And so he got the points for being the greatest cheat.
Right. So it was a timed event in the day. It was considered a race as such, or was it a?
Yes, of course. It wasn't allowed to be a race because that would be dangerous. But there was one bit which I mentioned where we did actually race. It was only about 20k on a very dirt track, and I've never seen drivers go so fast. We had John Laws, who was a track racing expert, Barry Ferguson, and could they drive? I mean, they almost risked getting points deducted for taking the trial seriously. And as you know, you must never take it seriously or you're going to have points deducted.
Yeah, we're pretty firm on all that stuff now, but I'd love to have seen it in the day though. Now, obviously, you've been a prolific supporter of many charities over the years. I'm just wondering what the deciding factor is for you when you're choosing to support a charity through your, obviously, events or your sort of circumnavigations or whatever it might be. Just wondering what. Yeah,
well, I try and help as much charity. I think it's an obligation. I do my giving for selfish reasons. It makes me feel good. And I chose Variety for the bash, thinking it was just going to be a one-off event. I had no idea it would continue. And I knew Variety was a very important charity, especially for young children. And so I'd been to a number of Variety functions, and I thought, I rang up Variety and said, look, I'm running this bash, but we'll donate the money to you, but don't worry, you don't have to be involved. Because in those days, everyone's scared of getting sued. And someone thought, oh, they'll go on the bash and someone will get injured, and then the charity, if it was running it, would get sued. So I made sure it was completely my responsibility. I was the chief judge, the organizer, the mischief maker, and if anyone was going to sue, they'd be suing me.
And managed to sort of slide under the law enough?
Yeah, we did. We all had to have CAMS licenses for some reason, and we weren't supposed to be racing, but we did have one bit of racing at Ada Vale, and we shouldn't have really done it, but we got away with it, so that was okay.
Well done. Our event next year is obviously heading to Great Keppel Island, and we're going via Birdsville.
Yep.
I noticed that you've once made an offer to purchase the hotel in the 80s. What drove you to buy or look to buy such a remote?
Yeah, I actually owned the Birdsville pub for one day. We'd exchanged contracts. It was $62,000 for the whole lot, but the next day it burnt down. And so I quickly rang up and rescinded the contract. So I did own the Birdsville pub for one day. I bought it from Rex Ellis, who was a camel driver and adventurer. And I'm glad I didn't buy it because the people who've had it, Dave and Nell Brook, and they've done a wonderful job with the Birdsville pub. It's recently changed hands again, which is good.
They're doing well now. Like I know obviously travel's a bit difficult this year, but in my dealings with them, they're marketing the place well, and they're getting lots of tour groups. They're quite
Yeah, no, look, they'll be okay.
in the area.
Times will come good again, and there's no doubt they'll do very well out of it. It's a famous icon.
Yeah, that's right. And then you've had a fascinating history with pioneering adventures in and across Australia and around the world, of course, including being the first person to circumnavigate the world solo in a helicopter. There's some great photos that will flash up for everybody to see shortly. You also flew over the top of Mount Everest in a helicopter. How was that?
Well, I tell you what, that'd be impossible. It wasn't in a helicopter, it was in my Citation jet, because the top of Everest is 29,000 feet. And in fact, the French actually landed a helicopter on the top. But when I went to Mount Everest, it was in my little business jet called a Citation, which was ideal for flying around. And I can't believe, as we were flying around the summit, we're only about 500 feet from the summit, I could see these footsteps went right up to the top. And we found out the next day that the Spanish had summited Mount Everest the day before, and that was the footsteps of the Spaniards. The other thing is looking down the north face, which is where Greg Mortimer and Tim McCartney-Snape, the first Australians to climb Everest, they went up the north face, and looking down in my jet from 29,000 feet, it looked completely vertical. I couldn't believe how anyone would be able to do that climb.
Yeah, right. How far from the summit were you on the plane?
I'd say as close as 500 feet. We're sort of flying around in orbits, and the summit of Mount Everest is half in China and half in Nepal. But we were right there on the summit, and then we dropped down and flew over the South Pole. So it was actually magnificent footage we got.
Amazing to see. I'll include the map of the world with all of your trips as equally as amazing viewing as well. So,
hey, by the way, if anyone is interested, if you key Dick Smith Adventure, all one word, into Google, it comes up with my site where it's got all my documentaries and around the world by helicopter, the ballooning docos, and Mount Everest. It's all there.
Thank you. We'll put it up on the post as well when we get to the night. Why do you think events like the Bash are so important for regional communities?
Yeah, look, I think the Bash is really important. First of all, most of us, like myself, live clean to the coast in cities. And so we identify with the outback. But the outback's it's been doing it tough. First of all, they had drought, then they had bushfires. Now they're at least getting decent rain, but you've got to look at the long term. And the advantage of the Bash going out, and you do something now which we didn't do at the time. We weren't making and helping each particular town as we went. We just made the money and then it was distributed. Now I understand that you actually help towns on the way, and that's absolutely fantastic, because most of those towns, some of them in pretty desperate situations, and to have a large group of people coming through, spending money and then donating to the school or something like that, that's really fantastic. And everyone's doing it because it makes you feel good. It gives you satisfaction for doing something right. We've
done some figures and worked out that for a single night stay, we often put in up to $100,000 into the town through accommodation and
wonderful
food and drink, and then often grants as well. So yeah, I know what you mean. Like it does make a massive difference.
Yeah.
And then what is it about variety that inspires so many lively characters like yourself to get involved?
Well, I think it's such an important charity. It's the charity of show business, and originally that's why I picked variety to actually go with it. And the interesting thing is that the chief barker at the time was Tony Hashem, and it was Tony's idea. He said to me, "Dick, do you mind if I, run the Bash next year and keep running it?" And I said, "No, that'd be fantastic," thinking, it'll go 2 or 3 times and then it'll fade out and no one will be interested. But of course, I was completely wrong. And the Bash has become this major fundraiser for variety, and it's been copied all around the world, which is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's raised over $200 million since your first event across the country, of course. So right. it's had an amazing impact. And as you see, with the 350 or so people that come on our event, it still continues to have a great impact, and it's very relevant still. So
that's really great. Now, by the way, how are you going to drive to Great Keppel Island?
We're staying in Yeppoon. We can't take the vehicles over. They barely even have a jetty
right
on the island. So yeah, we're very much on hand and or feet that trip, I'd say. And
It sounds fantastic. I've stayed at Great Keppel years ago, and I flew over it in my Cessna Caravan a few months ago, and it looks a beautiful place.
Nice one. Well, we'd love to have you on the event next year if the dates align. Obviously we'll be in Burgesville. There's an airstrip right at the front too, so you're more than welcome. I'm sure you have lots of people who love to say good day. And
I'll try and meet you at some unusual location, but have your checkbook ready to pay some money to Variety.
Sure, sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy. So for everybody in Melbourne, we're obviously in quite a hard lockdown, and next few weeks are going to be pretty tough. So it's great to speak to you about the event that's going to be going ahead next year. So
wonderful, and times will get better in the end. I mean, this is something that's pretty difficult what we're going through, but I'm sure in a year's time we're going to be looking back and saying, "Gee, we got through that okay."
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dick.
Thank you.
We'll hopefully see you next year.
Good to see you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.